and welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we are so glad to have you here. A proposal in Trenton could limit public and press access to the State House parking garage, which is funded by the taxpayers. The plan would force visitors, reporters, and the general public to park outside and navigate Trenton's streets to reach the Capitol. State Senator Joe Cryan is standing by to discuss what this means for the public and the press. First, though, we're going to be diving into an issue hitting close to home for many in New Jersey, and that is the rising cost of electricity. Whether you're a homeowner, a renter, or a small business owner, chances are you've noticed your electric bill climbing. A new bill aiming to address that, with lawmakers calling on the Board of Public Utilities to launch a full investigation into the regional pricing system, and that is what determines what we all pay for power. Joining me now to discuss these critical initiatives is one of the sponsors of the legislation, State Senator John Burzichelli. Senator, good to have you. Thank you for being here.
Laura, it's always good to be with you, and this is a topic that's getting a lot of attention, and it's complicated stuff.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that it's complicated. Even in trying to come up with a setup to explain this, your bill is directing the Board of Public Utilities, which we call the BPU, to investigate the PJM. Now, the PJM, it's like an air traffic controller for electricity, and that runs the regional power grid. And it also oversees energy auctions where the price is determined. Very complicated. So can you cut through all of this and explain where are the flaws that you're identifying in the process that we go through to set our energy costs, and why we're seeing such a dramatic increase in prices for New Jersey consumers?
Well, you actually explained it very well, because the PJM, which is a group that every consumer likely hadn't heard of, plays a large role here. And that's made up of 13 states, New Jersey, of course, being one of them, and then the District of Columbia. And they are what's called a regional transmission operator. And they're responsible to move electricity around. And they do that part very well. But they're also tasked with running what's called a capacity auction. Because remember, we're in a partially deregulated environment when it comes to energy. And in this case, the generation of electricity is a deregulated market. So you have independent people, you have some utilities generating electricity, and every so often, depending what cycle PJM is using, they hold what's called a capacity auction to get prices of what people are going to charge to generate electricity and supply it into the grid. And the generation portion of our bill is anywhere from 45 to 60% of the bill. And that's where the stress is at the moment. And that's where this devastating increase, which we should all be outraged over, including our resident utility companies, PSEG, Atlantic Electric, Jersey Central Power and Light, and there's a fourth one that has a small territory just outside of New York, should, in my mind, should have been more outraged. So the auction went, the last time the auction was held, which was a couple of years ago, the electricity was being bought at $28 a megawatt hour. I think I have that term correctly, but nonetheless, it was $28. They did an auction last June, July, and the new bid number, that the new price was going to be paid, was $270 for the same unit of electricity going into the grid. It's a 10 times increase. And no one banged on a table. No one was outraged. As we got into it with hearings, it's very clear that the auction process didn't serve us. It was flawed. And the questions we still haven't got answered was there, did vendors talk to each other? Was there a price set prior to the auction? What are their bidding rules? There's great secrecy around this, which we're trying to break through, and that's what we're asking the BPU to get us that information. But right now, we're held hostage. Frankly, we'd like, a number of us that serve on the select committee would like our attorney general to try to get into federal court and to have the auction, the results of the auction set aside. And more importantly, there's another auction coming up in June and July, and they have a ceiling they're allowed to go to from 270 to 350. We're asking that auction not be held, because we've lost confidence in the PJM's ability to run an auction. In fact, the PJM itself is having up people. The CEO or president, I'm not sure the title, announced his retirement as this was unfolding, moving back to Texas at a recent retreat. The chairman of the board was not reelected, a board member not reelected, and even FERC itself, that's the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has expressed concern as to PJM and their structure at the moment. Meanwhile, New Jersey ratepayers are held hostage. It's not acceptable. Outrage is understandable.
All right. So, again, the viewers following along, the PJM originally stood for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland Connection because it began sharing electricity for those three states back in 1927. Now there are 13 states involved. So you have 13 states involved and no transparency. So nobody can get to the bottom of what's happening and pulling back those layers. How are other states helping or hurting in trying to get this information? I would think there would be power in the number of states trying to understand and get these rates, not only understand the process, but make things livable. And because, residents are facing staggering increases on their bills with no relief in sight.
Well, Lord, now say you're treading in a dangerous area when you're suggesting common sense be injected into this discussion.
Oh, is that what I
There are a
did?
couple states, it felt that way. There are a couple states that are impacted even more than New Jersey. Maryland comes to mind. And again, by the way, so, we looked from our side, meaning the Assembly and the Senate, as to whether we would go hire America's best utility attorney and try to get into court, and found out that we were told we did not have standing to do that, and that we've called on our Attorney General to be aggressive about this. Last time around after the auction, Pennsylvania sued Governor Shapiro. New Jersey joined that suit, as did Illinois, and I'm not sure who else joined. And they reached a settlement with PJM and said, well, because PJM in this auction coming up wanted a $500 ceiling for that unit of electricity. And PJM agreed to narrow that down to 350, and people seemed to celebrate. I asked the question of where did the 350 number come from, and PJM at one of our hearings said it was an arbitrary number. So, again, it gets back to we've lost our confidence in them. They're very good at moving electricity, maybe the best in the country. They're not very good at running auctions. And so we have to figure out how to fix this in the short term till we can get our legs under us. I mean, clearly New Jersey needs more generation internally, because wind, which would have come on in 2.5, 3 years from now, the first wind farm, the president decided that wasn't something he liked, and that was power equal to a nuclear plant. That's not coming now. And the renewable stuff, the big solar fields, have had trouble getting onto the grid because of PJM's own internal rules and regulations. And we need battery storage, which our BPU has got to be more aggressive about. So everything, we're in a perfect storm here. And I think with the public discussion about demand and this rising demand, the people that generate electricity saw an opportunity to gouge the market. And that, in my opinion, is what they have done. Because think of it this way. With all the talk about not electricity being generated, all that, and then suddenly when the number goes 10 times higher, there's all the electricity we need. All we have to do is pay 10 times more for it. And in that same period, you'll find this interesting. So the auction happened last June. The December following that June, PJM told a 411 megawatt plant generating electricity in Delaware that you can come offline 2 years earlier because we don't have concern about reliability issue. We're going to cover your territory with transmission. Took out of the system 411 megawatts because they didn't need it. After they ran an auction under the guise that there's a great shortage, and so we should expect to have a higher price to pay to buy the same electricity. Something just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like, when years ago, the artificial housing, the increase in the housing market, and then people were getting mortgages they couldn't afford, and then, because people were not being honest. It feels like that. What is it?
Laura, by the way, this industry does not have a good history in operating in a deregulated market. I mean, Enron comes to mind, and there's a few other incidents where they sort of ran away with things when they thought they could. So I'm not suggesting all that's happening here. I'm just telling you that this doesn't feel right. And we don't even know how our own utilities voted in these PJM processes. So as simple as that is, we don't know. We don't know.
Well, what do we know about what our electric bills are going to cost over the summer? I mean, everybody's saying buckle up.
Well, yes, buckle up is a very good word, and you have to manage the household. Obviously, we're hoping some of these increases can be pushed off while we get our legs under us to try and understand this better and maybe affect some real change. BPU is looking at a couple of things. Governor recently signed legislation I sponsored called Energy Alert, which means 10 days into your bill and 20 days into your bill, you're going to get a text or an email letting you know how your bill is running. So if you can make some adjustments, maybe you can, so you don't get that one bill at the end of the month that's sticker shock. That doesn't lower the price, but at least it gives you a chance to see what's coming and maybe make some adjustments. So we're in a bad spot here. And let me give you another example. And so at all the hearings we've had, none of our utilities expressed outrage over this price. They just accepted it, which tells me everybody was in the mix. So our nuclear plants, 3 of them in Salem County, which I represent, generate 40+% of the New Jersey's electric needs. Of course, all that goes into the grid and eventually comes back. But just think of this: on one day coming up in this month of June, the day, and one day they're getting $28 for a unit of electricity, and the very next day they're going to get $270 for the same unit of electricity they're selling into the grid. So, and it doesn't cost 10 times more to generate electricity at the nuclear plant in a 24-hour period. These are the questions we have, and we have not gotten clear answers as to how this could happen.
Have you given any ultimatums? Is there a timeline that you are setting out? How much power do you have to actually get the answers? How much confidence do you think do you have on if you're going to get those not only answers, but be able to do something about it? Not only point out, hey, this is a flaw, this is wrong, but this is unethical, this shouldn't be called for, we need to do something different. And someone needs to be held accountable for whatever it is that they are doing.
Well, it's all those pieces. In my opinion, remember, I'm just a legislator. We don't have purview over the generating community that bids in these processes. They're in the main, they're not located in New Jersey, so we can't reach across state lines. And the PJM process, which is controlled by FERC, as I mentioned earlier, that's who they answer to. So, they don't care about us. I mean, they care about our ratepayers. They care about the fact they got to move electricity, and I mean that sincerely. Do a good job at that. This other part, not so good. So our reach is challenging. I mean, we can ask the BPU to do things, but it's very interesting. Our BPU, and I think they're run by very good people. It's run by very good people. They have similar agencies in all the other states. I feel that there's a degree of intimidation at the regulatory level, at the state level, to this PJM, because they're just afraid to stir it up, for lack of a better term. And this needs to get stirred up, because we got to understand, is deregulation serving us at this point, or is it not? We know there's great demand coming, which we have to answer to all that, but that demand is not entirely here yet our electric bills are going to reflect it as if it were, because as PJM runs auctions, it's about potential demand on the highest day, not today. Today's a cloudy day with respect to how electric is demanded. So collectively, we're going to have to make a decision: is deregulation in its present form serving us well? And that answer is yet to be determined. Right now, I would tell you on the generation side, it's not.
For the here and now, understanding that your reach as a legislator is limited, what do you tell your constituents, the people watching here, when they're the ones facing the reality of they've got to pay that bill that they can't afford? Not because they're using more electricity or they're being irresponsible, but because somebody somewhere has made a bid at auction and tried to determine and guessed the market on how much they may or may not use. What's your message to those people who've got to write the check to the power company?
Well, it's a very painful discussion, because there are not easy answers. People can only conserve so much, and even if you're running a very tight household, you're still going to pay more. Our BPU is looking at enhancing some programs to help households of medium and low incomes to be able to offset these increases that may come at some point. We're hoping we can push the increases off in a significant way so we can get our legs under us, as I mentioned earlier. But that's also a little bit of a long shot. So we're relying on the BPU to make new programs available to help people offset the bill a little bit. But it's going to be more expensive in the short term, so we can hold PJM accountable, understand the auction process, and in the end, we have to build more generation in New Jersey. And wind now is on hold, so that means it's time to build a couple more gas plants. That needs to happen, and to enhance getting more solar up and onto the grid with battery storage. That can happen quickly, not in a year, not for the next couple of months, but that can happen quickly. So there's work to be done with regards to getting more generation in place. That'll help bring the price down. But in the short term, someone's got to answer for this. What happened here doesn't feel right. And again, so there was a great shortage, which is why we're told there's a high price, but yet there's enough electricity if you're willing to pay 10 times more. That doesn't make sense.
State Senator John Burzichelli, Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. A very complex issue. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Good to be with everybody.
A new proposal in Trenton could restrict public and press access to the State House parking garage, which is paid for by taxpayers, forcing visitors and members of the press to park elsewhere and navigate Trenton's streets to reach the Capitol. State Senator Joe Cryan is joining us now to discuss its impact on transparency and access. Senator, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Laura, always a pleasure. And let me just begin by thanking you and the team you work with. The work on the debates was extraordinary and a great service to the citizens of the state. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you. We appreciate that. We appreciate that. We, want to take information and make it accessible to people. And when you talk about information and accessible to the people, the State House, that legislative sessions, those are open to members of the public. One of the last times I was there, when I was there for the governor's, I believe it was the State of the State address, parking was really hard to come by, but I have reserved parking. I'm a member of the media. When I drove up, they're like, I don't know if there are going to be any spots for you. And then, come to find out that there have been a lot of changes with the parking garage. And while there still are places for the members of the media, that could be changing. Can you tell us a little bit about where we are right now?
Well, and first I want to say thank you to the state police and those that are concerned about security and keeping us safe. We're unfortunately live in a time where safety concerns have to be understood and appreciated. That said, we've got work to do. Folks waited north of 45 minutes to get in the State House the other day because of a consolidation of entrance points. There's ways to deal with that have to make it more effective. And parking, the idea behind some of the proposals is potentially to go find parking outside of the actual State House. What I try to remind people of is that the State House was paid for by the people of New Jersey. We're actually, someone like me is just very fortunate to have a moment in time to be able to do our business, but always understand that we work for the people. And anytime you make access points excessively long or a feeling of frustration, you create all sorts of different situations that don't allow for the people's business to be done in a proper format. When that happens, we've got to move that pendulum, so to speak, back to the right point between security and, frankly, access.
You bring up such a good point. I've always felt it such an incredible privilege to be able, when there was a press row at the State House, that was my workplace, and it's historic. It's beautiful. They've done renovations. The executive unit has been finally complete, and there are all types of questions about limited accessibility for security. So how do you strike that balance between ensuring people who work there are safe and visitors who have every right to come there are able to access it? How do you walk that balance?
Well, I think there's just some proposals out there that make a lot of sense to me. I'm a former sheriff. Security was part of the situation in our local courthouses as well. Here's a couple that seem to make some sense. You could, in fact, much like TSA does today or Clear, you could use folks that are regulars that are coming in and out, whether they be lobbyists, whether they be members of the media, whether they be advocates that are traditionally at State House sessions, those sort of things. You could use some sort of clearance form. They register as lobbyists. You can do a background check. You could either do a separate entrance or a separate type of badge that just allows those folks, for lack of a better way to put it, be pre-screened and come on in. When I looked at those lines the other day, there were a lot of familiar faces. And then more importantly, I think it's folks that come in as a visitor, which in my view are still the most important because they're not visitors. They own the place. They paid for it. You mentioned the renovations, which were north of $300 million. And of course, the State House complex itself, which is not easy to navigate. So we've got to make that access point. One of the ways to do it is to make the lines much, much shorter. Obviously, the ability to have multiple entrances where folks can gain easy access as members of the public is an important part of the process. We need to reduce the lines. We need to make accessibility better. I'm always a little frustrated. The most important part of being a senator, in my view, is listening to your constituents. When folks are willing to take, because remember, we meet during the day, Laura, just I know you know that, but just to your listeners, we're during the working day. Committees start at 10:30 or 1:30. So you're asking folks to take a day off generally work. Professionals come in for advocating on legislation, plus minus doctors that miss a day's worth of care with their patients, nurses the same. When you get those folks to have to do that, and quite frankly, citizens who give us their personal stories, which are the most important part of legislation because it's about the people. Anytime we make that less, that opportunity less for legislators to do, less for the public, we all lose.
So the people who are watching understand there are two entrances to the State House, and there's usually the one on West State Street. There's usually a state trooper, and then there's a security desk. You go through those, and then on the other side of the back side, closer to Route 29 in Trenton, there are a couple of different lanes. One, if you're a pass holder, if not, for the visitor. Have there been some threats or concerns? Like, what brought this on? Are there limited resources in order to get things through? Because, I've been coming there since the 90s, and even on the busiest of days, there haven't been lines backed up waiting 45 minutes to get in.
Let me first and foremost never represent that I know the inside details of this. I don't want to say something I'm not. That said, it's obvious that consolidation was done for a particular reason. And again, the folks in the state police who do a tremendous job in terms of security, I'm sure are going to, what you do when you have something that's an issue, you review it and you make modifications, and I'm sure they will here. There are multiple entrances. Dedicating one potentially to what I just mentioned, the pre-screen idea, the ability to do that might make perfect sense. We don't get a tremendous, I wish we had more, but we don't get a tremendous amount of the public that comes into sessions. But the other day, for example, Laura, there were classes going on. There were teachers and folks and classes of 15, 20 students coming in, spending 15, 20 minutes at a time in hearings to learn about the process. So you do get people that come in, and how we do that, there are multiple entrances. To your point, to me, the easiest and simplest thing to do is pre-screen, make it easily accessible for the public, and then move on from there.
The location of Trenton, it is an area that is high crime, and there is a concern. It's not just about accessibility to the State House, but okay, fine, you can't park inside the State House. They're working on security. There's a limited number of spaces. Where else do you go? And what about the security outside the State House? And how do you protect that? What are your thoughts on that? And what information?
That's part of the difficulty of this equation, right? It's not as if you're pulling up to the Prudential Center and there's 50 different lots all around. That's not the access point here. The Marriott, which is one of the favorite points, has got its own set of issues and conditions that I think make it unfavorable for folks. There's a great deal of confidence in the leadership in Trenton and leadership of the Trenton Police Department in terms of how they manage their jobs, and we appreciate that. But I do think that the State House complex, and it is a complex, ought to be able to accommodate those in need within the complex.
Right, right. Well, I mean, because even like other agencies, authorities, they have parking lots, but those are, they're gated. They are for employees only. When you have other people, as you mentioned, there are a lot of lobbyists and people that you see on a regular basis coming in and out. I believe there are some people who are saying limiting access or getting rid of the visitor parking is part of a broader plan, and it's sending a message about public access and transparency, and looking to the current administration, especially after the elimination of press row. What do you have to say about that? I personally miss press row. There is a reporter area, but I know that's part of a bigger conversation in the diminishment of press row. But you don't have as many reporters, and every year, as throughout the decades that I've been there, you used to be able to walk into the governor's office. Then when Christy Whitman was in office, there was a gate that went up, and more and more security. Again, striking that balance. But when they talk about, when some of the critics say, well, the current administration doesn't care about transparency, and they want to close this up, it's a deliberate move. What do you have to say to that?
First and foremost, no, I don't believe that. Okay, I don't believe that in the least. And having someone who's had the good fortune of having accessibility into the governor's office at pretty much any moment in time, with the exception of Christie, the reality of it is that you tend to do things based on security needs. We live in a different world today. We live in a different world, and a far more complex world than even the tragedy of 9/11. We know threats are out there. Like it or not, it's just the situation that we are in today. So I completely respect those in security that say, here's the way we think you should do that. And there needs to be that fine balance that we talked about at the beginning of the segment. Do I think Phil Murphy sat down and said, let's figure out a way? No, absolutely not. Do I think any member of his team did? Absolutely not. What you're doing is you're listening to input from those who take their security as the professionals that they are in the state police and in the State House Commission, and you're listening, and you got to make modifications as you do. And I think the proof will be in the pudding that you'll see. This governor has been my interaction significantly and unconditionally, that he enjoys dealing with people, the public, and he actually is a people's person. And I don't see this as any sort of conspiracy.
Are you looking at what other states are doing? You know, I know every state is different depending on where their capital is located, but to Pennsylvania, to New York, and what they're doing. You know, some areas they charge for parking, but it may not be taxpayer funded. So, what's your timeline? You know, again, what are some of the other alternatives? What states are you looking to try and come up with a plan to address this?
Again, I do not want to overstate my role in this as a senator. It's very, very limited. There hasn't been a whole lot of discussion in the Senate caucus or in other places. I wouldn't want to mislead those that can hear my voice to think that I have some role that isn't there. But that said, I am certain that the legislature is going to weigh in significantly in terms of public access. And we all believe in it. We all work for the public. We work for the people who allow us to pay for it, to allow us to be put there. So I do think you'll see that weigh-in come as time moves on. No, I don't, Laura. Look, the parking situation is what it is. To me, it's really about access. I think to my colleagues, you'll hear the same. And we will work, and I'm sure carry a message of making sure that public access that's combined with public safety, both in the building and outside the building, are important.
All right, State Senator Joe Cryan, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. And also, so our viewers know, every time I come up with my camera and my microphone, you always make time to talk to me. So thank you for doing that too.
It's always a pleasure. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
Thank you.
And that'll do it for today. I'm Laura Jones. So thanks so much for watching New Jersey Politics. We look forward to seeing you back here next time.